Ne maradj le a legújabb Vakondok rész a Stems Back limitált gyűjtői kiadásáról.
In 1984, I was working in an advertising agency. I'd been there for 2 years. I was 24 years old. And I saw my brother playing with a home computer called a Commodore 64. And I thought, that's fantastic, these little games that he was playing. So I thought I should start a company making those games because I think it's going to be a big business. You know, a lot of people didn't really think that video games or computer games were going to be big. They thought it was like a toy. It would be over by Christmas, you know. But I could see that it was actually a sort of an art form and that it was only going to get better. Computers were going to become faster. The graphics were going to improve. Sound was going to improve over time. And therefore, it would actually appeal to more people and become a much larger business than it was in 84 when it was really a hobbyist industry. And we had an idea of a game that would be an adventure game as opposed to an action game, but an adventure game. But there would be, for the marketing side of it, there would be a prize. So the first person to get through the game, find a secret telephone number which is embedded and ring the number, they'd win £25,000, which, you know, in 1984, that would buy you a house. So it was quite a lot of money. And that the idea, of course, came from our sort of natural sense of marketing. We were advertising agency guys, and we did those sorts of promotions for our clients all the time. We thought, make it a promotion. So people would buy it, yes, to play a game, but also because they could win. The first thing we had to do was go and raise the money. So we went and saw a lot of people, some of whom put money into the business so we could kick it off. Others had contacts and people that they'd come across. And there was a guy called David Bishop who we came across, and he was already sort of in the games industry a little bit as a PR agent. And he knew Robert Stein, and he said, I'm sure he can help you out getting the game done. So we went to see him in North London at his offices, and I forget what his main business was, actually. I'm not sure. I think he had lots of different things that he did. He was already a wealthy man. And he said he could get the game that we'd had, which was all scripted by Ian Livingston. He said that he could get that made in Budapest. We published the game. It was called Eureka. And it did quite well. And we got our money back. We sold, it was on Spectrum and Commodore. And I think we sold pretty much 50,000 of each. I'm going to say the total number was about 100,000 copies, which we priced at £5.50, or actually £5.85 was the exact number, plus VAT. And it went on the shelves at about, I think £15 or something like that. So, so we, as I say, we sort of got our money back from the advertising, packaging, development, us, the company, and then we were sort of like, oh, okay, so it didn't fail and it didn't go to the moon. What do we do now? We had the idea of doing a James Bond game, and we went off that way. And of course, from that moment, the company grew from 1984 to 1995, when we launched it on the stock market, and it became worth hundreds of millions of pounds. But that's a long journey. But it started with Andromeda. I never really thought they wouldn't be able to do a good job, and they did a good job. I mean, they made a game, an adventure game, which people enjoyed and worked well. I don't think I ever had any doubts that they couldn't have done that. And of course, I went to see and meet the team before we actually commissioned the game. So I went to Budapest, and they all seemed to be great. They all spoke great English, which helps. And they seemed to know what they were doing. I mean, they were learning as well. Don't forget. It was everybody was learning, and so it was a journey for everybody, I think. But they came in on time, and there have been plenty of occasions when I've commissioned games that have not come in on time. I had no technical background. I was a marketing man. I was an advertising agency guy. So I was looking at the business and how we would promote it and market it. And I left the creative to Ian. I went to see him in his offices in Southampton, Acton, I think it was. And he'd already been working and building up the Games Workshop, which is obviously, figurines, Dungeons and Dragons types of games. But he was a games guy. So, he understood straight away what the possibilities was, the potential. And he was the first person pretty much to put a check for £10,000 in, as an investment, because he was already doing very well with his fighting fantasy books, as well as the Games Workshop itself. So he was a great supporter. And through the years, we obviously saw each other quite a bit. He continued to support the company. And when I floated it on the stock exchange, I asked him to be chairman. So, yeah. In terms of when we, aside from the money he put in, we thought he would be a good name to put on the box. So we asked him if he could actually write the adventure stories. And he had a team actually who helped craft and write stories like this for his books and for other things. So he sort of got a team together and they all worked to create the Eureka stories, which were then passed to the Hungarian team to turn into a game. I'm pretty sure that we discussed it with Ian and we sort of came up with the idea of five different chapters of this adventure game. And I'm fairly certain that once that was done, it was really over to him and his team to kind of flesh it out and turn it into a fun adventure game. I mean, they were similar in a way to his books, where, you roll the dice and then you go to page 33 and you read what happened. Oh, yes, well done. Now you can. So there was that his books were already interactive. So he was the right sort of person to help write the scripts for an interactive game. But it was fairly low-level stuff in those days. These things became much deeper and more complicated later on. I'm sure it had lots of bugs. And I'm sure that we just didn't know what that was. I mean, in a way, we felt if the programmers had signed off on it, that it would work. This is our first game ever. And the idea of testing and QA and all of that was completely foreign to us. We didn't know anything about that. It's ironic, really. I was actually saying today to somebody that one of the companies that I've got a games company and a testing company, and I have maybe 600 people who work for me today testing games for QA purposes here and actually in Poland. And it's ironic because I never bother with QA when I was a publisher. If it was Christmas, it was ready, and we would assume that it had been tested by the developers. But you're right. I think that was probably quite a close call to get the game into manufacture in order to meet our deadlines to go to the shops. Because if we missed that, again, you're out of business. And it actually took, I don't know, I can't remember now, 6, 7, 8 months before a young English boy, of course the game was really only sold in the UK, called Matthew Woodley, actually did play all the way through and found the number. And the number was actually linked to a telephone with an answer machine in our lawyer's house. So we had a lawyer called Robert Bond, and he got a special telephone number from BT. Yes, it was just about BT, GPO those days, but the telephone company, and a special telephone line into his house with an answering machine. And it sat there for months and months and months. And he would just check, and then one day the flashing light, on the answer phone, I don't think he picked up that. He just answered, and it was Matthew Woodley going, I don't know if I've got the right number, but if so, and that was it. And he won the 25 grand. He was 15 at the time. So he was at school. And about 3 years later, with the school holidays, he would come and he would sit looking bit of sort of making the coffee, because he just loved the whole thing. He loved video games, obviously, so he was keen to be working with us or being around us. And then I think we sponsored him a little bit to go to university. And then after university, he eventually came and started to work with us. And I think he ended up in marketing department. And I'm pretty sure he married the PR girl in the marketing department, Anna Macaria. And they then set off, and he then joined Sega as a marketing director. So he started by winning this prize, and then that sort of led to a career. Amazing, really, you think about it. We started work in April, May, and the game was finished in November, so it was quite quick. But the industry was maturing around us. I mean, funnily enough, when we kicked off, we thought that most of our sales would come through mail order. Because in those days, that's how you sold computer games. It was just little advertisement in the back of magazines, and people would send in checks, and you get sackfuls of checks, and that was the model. But when it came to it, when we actually got near to Christmas, people like W.H. Smith's, big shop, big chain, even Boots, which was a bit bizarre, but they had, and there were lots of new mom and pop stores, little individual stores that was popping up everywhere. And they were buying games from distributors like Micro Dealer. And so you would sell your games to Micro Dealer, they'd pass them on. And it literally all happened between April and November. It was extraordinary. And so the same was true of developers. So by the time we got the other side of Christmas, there were lots of English development teams all offering their services. So we didn't have to continue to work with the Hungarians, who were obviously, yes, far away, wasn't ideal, from a communication standpoint, particularly in the days before the internet, So I think it just wasn't necessary, is what happened. And we weren't going to do another adventure game. We decided to go into action games and did James Bond. Well, we found a development team, and we basically got them to do a game on James Bond, and it was dreadful. It was the most awful game. It hardly worked. It was based on a film called A View to a Kill. And I knew the James Bond people, actually, as it happened. So I went to see them to get the rights. They were like, yeah, sure, But the game was appalling. And we sort of learned a lesson there. I mean, it sold actually quite well because it had James Bond all over it, and we did a lot of promotion. But actually, it wasn't very good. And that led us really to move towards licenses generally. We did our own games. I think of Codename Matt. I can think of a few others that we did, which were original games. But we kind of went after we did Trivial Pursuit, which was a big hit for us. We did the computer game version of Trivial Pursuit. We did Star Wars, which was a huge hit based upon the Atari Star Wars coin-op game, which was a really great game. And that led to a long relationship with Atari, where we pretty much from then on did all their coin-op games as home computer versions, because there was a very big business doing that for a while before console market. And Formula One and various other licenses. But we also backed some teams, like there was a team called Simis who did MiG-29, which was a flight simulator based on a Russian jet, MiG-29, and other flight sims after that. And we also backed people like the Collier brothers, who produced Championship Manager, which was one of our big hits. Still is a big hit. It's now called Football Manager because they split from IDOS a few years ago, not when I was there. So we had a mixture of our own IP and licenses. And, it built the company up. Now, of course, at the end, before I left, I found myself launching Tomb Raider at E3 in Los Angeles in 96. We'd already floated the company, and Ian had come in as chairman, and we were, rocking and rolling. And by chance, this game just came in from a studio, Core Design, and it was fantastic. And I could see everybody was going nuts about it. So we had a big party that night. Everybody was coming up to me saying, that's going to be big. And 40 million units later, yeah, it was. I think it's the first time anybody had done a really believable female heroine. Because up until then, it was all Duke Nukem, and it was all superheroes. And there were comic books that had things like Tank Girl and, and female characters and heroines. And so in the comic book field, it was quite prevalent, but the video game market just hadn't come out. I think probably you needed to have or build or create a very strong character to make boys believe that actually this is somebody to really, think could beat the shit out of you. And she looked like she could, so that was helpful. And actually she appealed to women as well. So lots of women thought that Lara Croft was very attractive, in every regard. So I think that was the main thing. It was the character. Now, frankly, coupled to that was a pretty decent game, a lot of fun, very good graphics, pushing the power of PlayStation 1, which had obviously just come out the year before. So it was breaking new ground of graphics. It was a good story, good gameplay, good graphics, and a great heroine. And that just made it different. Caught the imagination, I think. And it was, it's hard to do these things. It's a very difficult thing to manufacture. You kind of stumble on it. It sort of happens and you go, wow, how do we do that? Can we do it again? Nope. I mean, it's like saying what makes a good movie a good movie. I mean, at the end of the day, I think there's got to be a why. What's the why? Why am I doing this? What do I care about? And typically you care about characters and you care about, or certainly the plot lines. And it's got to be quite, it's got to draw you in, make you want to have one more go. Oh, I can have one more go. Oh, I failed, but now I know how to do it this time. So you've got to really, you believe in it, want to do it, and it's got to just tease you into believing you can win the next level, the next goal, whatever it is. So that leads to a kind of, you do get slightly addicted to it, and that means you keep going. I mean, in the coin-op business, it was all about dropping coins, okay? And they would test the games in special centers, and there would be guys with millboards. They'd be watching the kids coming in and playing the game, dropping quarters. And, if they stopped dropping quarters and walked away, they tried to fiddle with it, but often they would just be junked. So it needs that must have another go aspect because it's interactive. However, lots of games nowadays are more story driven and they look more like movies. And so, if you look at Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, those sorts of big, rich games, there's storytelling involved. And it's moved on from just being the addictive little tick, tick, tick sort of Tetris-like thing. It's sort of moved on. But there's many things that make a good game, and it's hard to contrive it. It's hard to know that you're on the right line. It's sort of, and most games don't make any money, by the way, for that very reason. All entertainment is play, really, and sport is play. And it's interesting. We learn to play when we're babies and kids because we're actually sort of mimicking what life is going to be about. So we have play fights with our kid brothers. We cry to get something that we want. We have to learn what to do to make our mothers reward us with a treat. I mean, we basically learn life skills, and it's play. You're playing, and like cubs with a lioness. She's cuffing them around. She's basically teaching them to fight. And I think we're like that. And it doesn't actually leave us entirely as we grow older. And when we watch football matches and we take sides, we want to support Manchester against Liverpool, that becomes tribal, my tribe beating your tribe, which is a need. I mean, we used to actually knock people on the head. Now we just go to a football match and have it done for us. And I suppose it's all past that sort of element of play that human beings need. And so I could pretend I'm driving a car very, very fast. when I know I can't really in real life, but I can pretend and play, go around a track very fast, and if I crash, it doesn't matter. But I can have the thrill of it, or I can shoot things, or I can, fly an aeroplane. I mean, all of those things. I think play is in us, and frankly, these days we have enough leisure time to where we can actually afford to play these games, or watch movies, or read books. Whereas you go back 100 or 200 years, we didn't have time because we were working to survive, and that meant that we didn't really have all this opportunity. So that's, I think, why people want to play. I think in the 80s and even the 90s, a lot of it was sort of technology driven. In other words, there was a lot of people would look at games and go, "Oh my God, how did they make the computer do that?" And they'd rush out and buy a game that may have had absolutely no interactivity, useless, nothing to, but actually looked fantastic and made, the Amiga's graphics chip sort of do something which nobody had ever seen before. I mean, Psygnosis were famous for coming out with games that looked fantastic and beautiful, weren't necessarily an awful lot of fun to play, but they were great to watch and look at and come and look at this. Ooh, wow. So it was technology driven. And actually, I think nowadays that's sort of, it's got to kind of almost a pitch where you don't notice the difference. It's not black and white to color, it's color to a little bit better color, like we have with televisions. And so it's no longer about that. It's about the content, the stories, and and the gameplay. So I think there's a different audience. We're now a mass audience. They don't care about what's behind it. They don't need to know what's inside a PlayStation 4. Couldn't give a monkey. Whereas before, they were engineers. They knew what was inside a Spectrum or a Commodore, and they were always taking it to bits. And they were, they get these fanzine magazines which would have lines of code, right, on 4 pages. And if you typed it in, right, and a game popped out. People spent hours, typing in the code just because it was fun. So the different audience. And that's, I think, the main difference between nowadays. We were absolutely focused on trying to get the programmers to do visual tricks or something, when vector graphics came in, everybody went nuts. I mean, Elite, brought in vector graphics and the trading. I mean, everybody was nuts about it. So we were very focused on that. And nowadays we're more focused on the storytelling. I think it's become a bit more like the movie business where, you can make a big hit, but it's going to cost you $50 to $100 million. Now, most games companies won't take that risk on something brand new. So they will do it on, Far Cry 3, but they won't do it on something straight away, or they won't spend that much. So what tends to happen is the big publishers have settled into promoting their pillar titles. The games they know every year or every 2 years, they know it's going to be huge, and they'll put a team of 300 people on it, and it's GTA. You're going to print money, so you just focus on that. They're less inclined to try something, brand new. But of course, every now and then something does come through, and then that, if it's a success, it's then turned into a sequel, and if that's success, then it walks itself up the ladder of development budget. And so I think it is hard today to make a great game out the chute because of the publisher's reluctance, and because it's just so expensive to do it. But what's interesting is the independent sector is now come back, because you've got to remember, when I kicked off for the first 6 odd years, it was, yes, Amiga, Commodore Amiga, Atari ST, PC, to some extent. And these were open formats. And when Sega and Nintendo came into the market, they changed everything. Some things to the good, like quality control, a limited number of games, so the market wasn't swamped with too much stuff. And, they made sure that their machines were bulletproof. Everything worked with everything else. You could throw it against the wall, bounce, put the cartridge in. Hey, it's running. So that was really good. It was good discipline. The bad thing was, of course, that it killed off the independent sector completely. So you had to be a publisher to have a license with Sega. You couldn't be, three guys in an attic. You had to do pretty big, complicated games because they wouldn't bother to let you do it otherwise. So much more expensive. And I think the creativity continued to some extent, but it wasn't as open and free. And here we are, 20 odd years later, and guess what? You've now got an independent sector again with the advent of Steam and, of course, digital publishing on Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo opened up to independent developers because there's no inventory. Because these things, okay, buy that from Nintendo as a publisher, $10 up front. So you want a million of those? That's $10 million up front before you sell it to the retailer. Very few people can do that if they're not big established publishers. That has gone. So that's no longer an issue, and it allows 2-3-man teams to put games up on Steam. And yes, some of them are making millions of dollars. So I think it's very exciting.